Adriana Heredia owns an Afro-Cuban clothes store in Havana's colonial quarter. She remembers how, a decade ago today, the presidents of the United States and Cuba made a surprise announcement. The two countries, longtime foes, would normalize relations.
For the first time, there was a thaw in the relationship. And the fact that the US president decided to come to Cuba, rather than just sign a paper or make a public statement, showed just how strong that intention was.
Barack Obama visited Cuba in 2016.
The embargo is going to end. When? I can't be entirely sure, but I believe it will end, and the path that we're on will continue beyond my administration.
As American tourists flooded the long-forbidden island, Adriana opened her business to surf the wave. But then, Donald Trump was elected president. 7 months into his administration, reports emerged that diplomats in the restored US embassy in Havana had fallen ill, attacked by a mysterious weapon. The tone in Washington hardened.
As soon as Donald Trump entered the White House, he immediately started to reverse things. And in the middle of all that happened the so-called acoustic attacks, which nobody has been able to explain ever, but it was used by the Trump administration, to close down the consulate here.
Softened by Obama, the embargo was tightened more than ever. And tour guides were hit when cruise liners that had docked in Havana were banned with immediate effect.
We thought that after Obama, there'd be a longer period of this situation, but Trump closed the cruise ships overnight. That day, we had various reservations with travelers, but when we got here, we found out they wouldn't be allowed to get off the ship.
The Biden administration kept the core of the Trump policy in place and tightened the screw, revoking visa-free travel to the US for Europeans who visit the island. The pandemic aside, this year's tourism figures are the worst in more than a decade.
Because of the lack of tourists in Havana, people are selling their cars and pulling out of this business.
10 years ago, Cubans didn't have mobile data. They do now, but with sanctions enforcement stronger than ever, doing business is a headache.
We don't have the right to play by the same rules as the rest of the world. We can't use PayPal. If you want to use something as simple as Zoom for a video call, you have to use a VPN.
Today, Adriana's business turns a smaller profit than the year it opened. It now focuses less on tourists and more on Cubans.
I've often felt depressed, thought about throwing in the towel, thought about leaving the country so many times. When the power goes out for the upteenth time, I say to myself, I don't deserve this. But at the same time, I tell myself, hey, you're not going to spend 80, 90, or even 100 years of your life playing the victim.
A record-breaking number of Cubans have left the country. Since the pandemic, the government says the population has dropped by more than 1 million. In the midst of the crisis, the island's main ally, Venezuela, cut deliveries of cheap petrol. Rubbish is piling up in the capital, but that's not the only problem.
Right now, there is no power. I can't even complain about it anymore because I've gotten used to it.
Vital supplies are running short.
We can't get all the medicines that we need. Many essentials aren't there. If you need 5 medications, maybe you can get 3.
With Cuban-American hawk Marco Rubio set to become the next Secretary of State, more sanctions are in the pipeline.
Cuba is more vulnerable now than it was in 2019. And it was already vulnerable in 2019, but today it's more vulnerable.
10 years ago, there was hope. A few weeks before Donald Trump entered the White House, many Cubans felt stoicism and despair. With Donald Trump back in the White House, many Cubans fear what comes next.